The gun wasn't loaded, but Mara Vance didn't know that. She stood in the doorway of a dying ranch, soaked to the bone, blood crusting her knuckles, staring at a man who'd just given her the ugliest choice of her life. Caleb Rourke, 6'3" of sun-baked leather and bad history, leaned against the kitchen counter like a king in a crumbling castle, studying her with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven nothing. "The porch," he said again, voice flat as the high desert around them. "Or my bed." No pity, no apology, just the truth, cold and mean as the January wind rattling the windows. Most women would have run, most men would have swung. Mara Vance chose the porch, and by sunrise, Caleb Rourke's world would never be the same. But before we dive into this wild ride of fire, betrayal, and one hell of a gamble that'll leave you breathless, if you love stories about people who refuse to quit, even when the whole damn world's against them, stick around until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels, and let's get into it. The storm had teeth. It came howling across the Wyoming basin just after midnight, the kind of late winter squall that could strip paint off a barn and freeze cattle where they stood. Caleb Rourke had seen worse, barely, but he hadn't seen worse in years, and the Iron Ridge Ranch wasn't what it used to be. Hell, it wasn't even a shadow of what it used to be. He was halfway through his third whiskey when he heard the knock. Not a polite knock. Not a, "Hello, I'm lost, can you help me" knock. This was the desperate percussion of knuckles on wood that said, "Let me in or I die out here." And Caleb Rourke had spent the last 10 years learning how not to care about people dying. He almost didn't answer. The knock came again. Harder. Angrier. "Son of a bitch," Caleb muttered, slamming the glass down hard enough to crack it. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, past the table piled with unpaid bills, past the calendar still showing October, though it was deep into January, past the rifle he kept loaded by the door because the world was full of things that wanted to take what little he had left. He yanked the door open. The woman on his porch looked like she'd been chewed up and spit out by something with no mercy. Mid-20s, maybe. Hard to tell under all that grime. Her hair was plastered to her skull, dark and wet, and her jacket, some threadbare denim thing that wouldn't stop a spring breeze, let alone a Wyoming blizzard, hung off her shoulders like a surrender flag. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Green, sharp, furious, not the eyes of someone begging. "You gonna let me in?" she said. "Or you just gonna stare?" Her voice had gravel in it, and something else, something that made Caleb's jaw tighten. "Don't know you," he said. "Don't need to." "Then you can freeze on someone else's porch." He started to close the door. Her boot stopped it. Caleb looked down at the scuffed leather wedged against his door frame, then back up at her face. Most people who tried that move did it with bravado, all puffed up chest and borrowed courage. This woman did it like she was already dead and just hadn't bothered lying down yet. "I can work," she said. "Don't need workers." "You're a liar." That got his attention. "Excuse me? Your fence line's shot to hell. Saw it walking in. North Pasture's got gaps big enough to drive a truck through. You've got maybe 20 head of cattle left, and half of them look like they're deciding whether it's worth the effort to stay alive." She tilted her head, rain dripping off her chin. "So yeah, you need workers. You just don't trust them." Caleb's hand tightened on the door. "You got a lot of mouth for someone asking favors." "Not asking a favor, offering a trade. Trade requires 2 things of value. What have you got I want?" She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Desperation? Same as you." The wind howled between them, carrying sleet that stung like buckshot. Caleb studied her, really looked. The blood on her knuckles wasn't hers. He'd seen enough split skin to know the difference. The way she held herself, weight on her back foot, shoulders loose, that was someone who knew how to take a punch and give one back. And her eyes never left his, not even when the cold made her shake so hard her teeth chattered. She wasn't running from the weather. She was running from something worse. "You got a name?" he asked. "Mara Vance. That your real name?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "It does." She laughed, short and bitter. "Then call me whatever you want. I'll still outwork whoever you got left." "I got 5 men. Good men." "Then you've got 6 in the morning. Or you've got 5 and a corpse on your porch. Your call, Rourke." He blinked. "How'd you?" "Sign on the gate. Iron Ridge Ranch, Caleb Rourke, proprietor." Big fancy letters for a place held together with spit and rust. She coughed, sharp and wet. We doing this or not? Caleb should have said no, should have shut the door and poured another drink, and let nature handle this problem the way nature handled everything out here, cold and permanent and without mercy. But there was something in her eyes, something he recognized, not hope. Hope was for fools. It was refusal. Refusal to quit. Refusal to beg. Refusal to give the world the satisfaction of watching her break. He'd worn that look once, long time ago, before the bank, before the drought, before his old man drank himself to death and left Caleb holding a ranch that was bleeding out slow. Come inside, he said. She didn't move. What? Need to hear the terms first. Caleb laughed, a sound like grinding gears. Terms? Lady, you're half frozen on my doorstep and you want terms? Especially then. He shook his head. Unbelievable. Fine. You want a roof tonight? You got two choices. He nodded toward the porch behind her, where an old bench sat buried under snow. You can sleep out there, freezing your ass off but keeping your dignity. Then he jerked his thumb toward the hallway behind him. Or you can come inside. My bed. Your choice. The silence that followed was colder than the storm. Mara Vance stared at him like she was deciding whether to spit in his face or put a boot through his teeth. That's the deal? She said quietly. That's the deal. You always this much of a bastard? Only when I'm being honest. Her jaw worked. For a second, Caleb thought she might actually swing at him. Part of him almost wanted her to. It had been a long time since anyone had the guts to fight him instead of just taking his money and leaving. But she didn't swing. She stepped back, turned, walked to the bench, swept the snow off with her forearm, and sat down. Suit yourself, Caleb said. I am. He started to close the door. Rourke. He paused. When the sun comes up, she said, not looking at him, I want breakfast. Then I want to see that fence line. I'll fix what your boys can't. You'll be dead by morning. Maybe, but if I'm not, you're going to owe me a meal and a chance. Caleb stared at her, this drowned rat woman with blood on her hands and ice in her spine, and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Respect. You got guts, Vance. Stupid, stubborn guts. Yeah, she said, leaning back against the wall and closing her eyes. I get that a lot. He shut the door. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the whiskey bottle empty now, listening to the storm tear at the roof and wondering if the woman on his porch would make it to sunrise. Part of him, the part that had grown hard and mean over 10 years of losing everything, figured she'd be gone by first light, either run off or frozen stiff. Part of him hoped she'd prove him wrong. At 5 a.m., he made coffee, strong and black, the way his old man used to make it before the drinking got bad. He fried eggs and bacon, more out of habit than hunger, and when the sky started to bruise purple with dawn, he opened the door. Mara Vance was still there. She was ice pale, shaking so hard she could barely stand, but she was alive. And when she looked up at him, those green eyes were still furious. Breakfast, Caleb said. She didn't say thank you, just pushed herself upright, stumbled past him into the warmth, and collapsed into a chair at the table. Caleb set the plate in front of her. She ate like a wolf, fast, efficient, no pleasure in it, just fuel. When she finished, she looked up. The fence. You're serious. You said I could work. I said a lot of things. Doesn't mean... Show me the fence, Rourke. He studied her. She was still shaking, still looked half dead, but that look in her eyes hadn't changed. You won't last an hour, he said. Then you lose nothing. Except time. You got so much of that to spare? Damn her. Damn her stubbornness and her sharp mouth and the way she looked at him like he was the one being tested. Fine, Caleb said. Get your coat. The north pasture stretched out like a scar on the land, 3 miles of rolling scrub and broken wire, testament to years of neglect and not enough hands to fix it. Caleb had 5 ranch hands left. Wyatt, his foreman, who'd been with the Rourke family for 30 years, Pete and Jess, brothers who worked hard but complained harder. Curtis, a kid barely 20 who didn't know a fence post from a fence post. And old Leo, who was 70 if he was a day and meaner than a rattlesnake with a headache. They were waiting at the fence line when Caleb pulled up in the truck, Mara Vance sitting silent beside him. Wyatt stepped forward, tall, grizzled, skeptical. "Boss, who's this?" "New hand," Caleb said. "New—" Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "You hire her last night?" "Something like that." "We don't need—" "North fence is still down, Wyatt. Has been for 2 weeks. You telling me you got it handled?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "We're working on it. Work faster." Caleb nodded to Mara. "She says she can help. Let's see if she's full of it or not." Mara got out of the truck without a word. She walked past the men, who stared like she'd sprouted a second head, and stopped at the nearest gap in the fence. 30 feet of downed wire, posts rotted through, the whole thing a mess of rust and neglect. "Tools?" she said. Wyatt pointed to the truck bed. "Hammer, wire, posts in the barn if you need 'em." She nodded, grabbed the hammer, went to work. For the first hour, nobody said anything. They just watched. Mara Vance moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She didn't waste motion, didn't hesitate. She pulled wire tight as a piano string, hammered staples with 3 clean strikes, and when a post broke, she hauled a new one from the barn, 60 pounds of rough-cut timber, like it weighed nothing. By noon, she'd closed 2 gaps. By sunset, she'd done 5. The men started helping around hour 3. Not because Caleb told them to, because they couldn't stand watching her outwork them. Wyatt pitched in first, then Pete and Jess, then even old Leo, grumbling the whole time about show-offs and damn fool women. When the light finally died and Caleb called it, they'd repaired more fence in 1 day than they'd managed in 2 weeks. Mara Vance stood in the truck bed, hands bleeding, face streaked with dirt, looking out over the pasture like a general surveying a battlefield. "Not bad," Wyatt said quietly. She glanced at him. "Not done." "You will be if you keep this up. Nobody works like that without breaking." "Then I'll break tomorrow." She jumped down from the truck, landing hard but steady. "Where's the bunkhouse?" Caleb pointed. "East side. You'll share with—" "I don't share." Wasn't asking. They stared at each other. The men shifted uncomfortably. "There's an old tack room," Wyatt offered. "Ain't much, but it's private, if that's what you're after." Mara looked at him, then at Caleb. "That'll work." Huts. The tack room smelled like leather and dust and decades of quiet. It wasn't much, a cot, a space heater that worked half the time, a window that didn't lock. But it was hers. Mara sat on the cot and looked at her hands. The blisters had blistered. Blood seeped through the rough bandages she'd wrapped herself. Everything hurt, shoulders, back, hands, ribs where she'd taken a hit 3 days ago, in a town she was trying to forget. But she'd done it. She'd earned breakfast, earned a place, earned 1 more day. Outside, she heard the men talking. Low voices, suspicious and curious. Where'd she come from? Boss didn't say. She running from something? Aren't we all? Mara closed her eyes, let the voices fade. She thought about the ranch, the land, the way it felt familiar in a way that made her chest ache. She thought about Caleb Rourke and his brutal honesty and the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem he couldn't solve. Most of all, she thought about the choice he'd given her, the porch or the bed. She'd chosen the porch, chosen cold and dignity over warmth and shame. And tomorrow, she'd make him regret ever giving her that choice in the first place. 3 weeks passed like a fistfight. Mara worked sunrise to sunset, 7 days straight, until even old Leo stopped grumbling and started nodding respect. She fixed fences, hauled feed, broke ice on water troughs in the freezing pre-dawn dark. She didn't talk much, didn't smile, didn't ask questions. But she watched. She watched the way Caleb ran the ranch, stubborn and solo, keeping everyone at arm's length. She watched Wyatt trying to hold things together with duct tape and prayers. She watched the cattle, too thin and too few, and the land itself, beautiful and brutal and barely hanging on. And she started to notice things. The way the north fence kept getting cut, even after they fixed it. The way cattle disappeared, 1 or 2 at a time, never enough to make a fuss, but enough to bleed them dry. The way Caleb got tense every time a black truck drove past the gate. She didn't say anything, not yet, but she remembered. It was a Tuesday when the stallion arrived. Mara was in the barn, mucking stalls, when she heard the commotion, men shouting, hooves crashing against wood, Wyatt yelling something about, "Get the damn gate closed." She dropped the shovel and ran. The horse was a nightmare in flesh, 16 hands of black fury, eyes rolling white, teeth bared. He'd kicked through 2 stall doors and nearly trampled Curtis, who was bleeding from a gash on his arm and looked ready to cry. "Where the hell did he come from?" Mara shouted over the chaos. "Buyer backed out," Wyatt yelled back. "Said he was too mean. Rourke took him cheap. Thought we could—" The stallion lunged at the gate. Wyatt jumped back. "Thought wrong," he finished. Caleb appeared in the doorway, face dark. "Get him in the far pen. We'll figure it out later." "Boss, he's gonna hurt someone." "Then don't get close." Mara stepped forward. "Let me try." Every head turned. "You?" Pete laughed. "Lady, that horse'll kill you." "Maybe." She looked at Caleb. "But if I'm right, you keep the horse. If I'm wrong, you bury me quiet and save on wages." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You got experience with this?" "Some. Some's a good way to die." "So standing around talking." For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he nodded. "Your funeral." Mara walked toward the pen slowly. The men backed up, giving her space. The stallion watched her approach, sides heaving, nostrils flaring. She stopped 10 feet away. "Easy," she said quietly. Not to the men, to the horse. The stallion stamped, snorted. Mara didn't move. "You're scared," she said. "I get it. New place, strange people. Everything smells wrong." She took 1 step forward. "But I'm not here to hurt you, and I'm not here to break you." Another step. "I'm here to make a deal." The stallion's ears flicked forward, listening. Mara kept moving, slow, steady. No sudden moves, no threatening posture, just a woman talking to a frightened animal like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. "You don't trust them," she murmured. "That's smart. Trust gets you killed out here." Another step. "But me? I'm just trying to survive. Same as you." She was 5 feet away now, close enough to see the scars on his flanks, old wounds, poorly healed. Someone had hurt this horse. Hurt him bad. "Yeah," Mara whispered. "I know that feeling." She reached out, slowly, palm up, non-threatening. The stallion's eyes locked on hers. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then the horse lowered his head and touched his nose to her palm. Behind her, someone exhaled hard. Mara didn't look back. She kept her focus on the stallion, letting him breathe her scent, letting him decide. "There you go," she murmured. "See? Not so bad." She ran her hand up his neck, slow, gentle. The stallion shivered but didn't pull away. "What's his name?" she called back. Wyatt's voice was tight with disbelief. "Ain't got one, just the black." "That's not a name. That's a description." She looked at the horse. "How about Cinder?" The stallion huffed. "Cinder it is." She spent the next hour with him, just talking, just being. When she finally led him into the far pen, no halter, no rope, just her voice and his trust, the men stared like she'd raised the dead. Caleb stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. When she walked past him, he caught her arm. "Where'd you learn that?" "Here and there." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." She pulled free and kept walking. Behind her, Caleb watched her go, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Curiosity. Huang. That night, the ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse, passing a bottle of cheap whiskey and talking low. "She ain't normal," Curtis said. "No shit," Pete replied. "Question is, what is she?" "Ex-rodeo, maybe," Jess offered. "Seen riders work horses like that?" Wyatt shook his head. "Rodeo riders don't show up in the middle of a blizzard with blood on their hands and no past." "So what, she's running?" Curtis leaned forward. "From what? Does it matter?" Old Leo drained his glass. "Girl works hard, keeps her mouth shut. That's more than most." "Still don't explain how she knows this land." The room went quiet. "What?" Curtis looked around. "Y'all noticed it too, right? Way she walks the property like she's been here before? Way she knew the north fence was bad without us telling her?" "Kid's got a point," Pete muttered. Wyatt stared into his glass. "Boss know?" If he does, old Leo said, he ain't saying. And if he ain't saying, neither should we. They drank in silence after that. Outside, Mara stood in the shadows, listening. When the conversation moved on, she slipped back to the tack room and sat on the cot, hands shaking. They were starting to notice. She'd been careful, so damn careful. But this land knew her, and she knew it, and sooner or later someone would ask the right question. She pulled a photo from her jacket pocket. Old, creased, faded. A man standing in front of the Iron Ridge gate, smiling, one hand on a young girl's shoulder. Her father. Her land. Her legacy. Stolen 30 years ago by lies and lawyers and men like Caleb Rourke's father. Mara put the photo away and lay back on the cot, staring at the ceiling. She'd come here for answers, for justice, for proof that her father hadn't been crazy when he swore until his dying day that this ranch was his. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. She'd started caring about this place, about the broken fences, and the struggling cattle, and the men who worked themselves half to death for a boss who barely paid them. She'd started caring about Caleb Rourke, even though he was everything she should hate. And that was dangerous. Because when the truth came out, and it would come out, everyone here would look at her the same way, like a liar, a thief, a ghost who should have stayed buried. Mara closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she'd work the south pasture, fix what was broken, prove her worth one more day. And tomorrow night, she'd keep digging, because the proof was here, somewhere on this land, buried deep. And when she found it, everything would burn. The cattle started disappearing on a Thursday. Mara noticed first because she'd been counting, not officially, not on paper, but in her head the way her father had taught her when she was 6 years old and learning what it meant to run a ranch that actually mattered. 23 head in the south pasture Wednesday night, 21 Thursday morning. She didn't say anything at breakfast, just ate her eggs and watched Caleb's face, looking for signs he knew. But he was focused on the stack of bills in front of him, jaw tight, pen moving across check stubs like he was signing away pieces of his soul. "Wyatt," he said without looking up. "South pasture count?" 23, boss. Same as yesterday." Mara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Wyatt was lying, or he'd counted wrong, or she looked at the foreman. His face was blank, but there was something in his eyes, something tired. "Good," Caleb said. He signed another check. "Pete, Jess, take the truck out to the Morrison place. They're selling equipment. See if that baler's worth the price." "Yes, sir." The brothers left. Curtis followed, mumbling something about checking water lines. Old Leo just grunted and headed out without a word, the way he always did. That left Mara, Caleb, and Wyatt. She waited until Caleb stood, gathering his papers, before she spoke. "South pasture's down 2 head." Both men froze. Caleb turned slowly. "What?" "Counted last night. 23. Counted this morning. 21, but..." Wyatt's face hardened. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling the numbers wrong." "Maybe you can't count. Maybe you can't either." Wyatt took a step forward. Mara didn't move. She'd taken worse than whatever the old foreman could dish out, and they both knew it. "Enough!" Caleb's voice cut between them like a blade. "Wyatt, go count again. Now." "Boss, now." The foreman's jaw worked, but he went. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Caleb looked at Mara. "You sure about this?" "Yeah." "Because if you're wrong, I'm not." He studied her for a long moment. Then he grabbed his coat off the hook and headed for the door. "Come on." They drove out to the south pasture in silence, the truck rattling over frozen ruts, the morning sun weak and pale against a sky that promised snow. Mara kept her eyes on the land, reading it the way she'd been taught, where the good grass grew, where the water pooled, where cattle liked to graze when the wind came from the north. She knew this land, every inch of it, every secret, and that was going to get her killed if she wasn't careful. Wyatt was already there when they arrived, standing by the fence, shoulders rigid. "Well?" Caleb called out. 21, Wyatt said quietly. Caleb's face went dark. "Where?" "Don't know. No tracks, no blood, no sign of a struggle." He kicked at the dirt. "It's like they just vanished." "Cattle don't vanish." "These ones did." Mara walked the fence line, eyes on the ground. The snow had melted in patches, leaving mud that should have held prints if anything had come through. But the mud was clean, too clean. "They didn't come through here," she said. "How do you know?" "Because whoever took them knew what they were doing." She pointed north, where the fence met a rocky outcrop. "They took them out that way, over the rocks. No tracks." Caleb followed her gaze. "That's a hell of a lot of trouble for 2 head of cattle." "Unless it's not about the cattle." "Then what's it about?" Mara turned to look at him. "Sending a message." The silence that followed was colder than the wind. "What message?" Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. "That you can't protect what's yours." Wyatt swore under his breath. "You think this is Hayes?" "Who else?" Caleb spat the name like poison. "Son of a bitch has been circling this place for months, waiting for me to fold." "Who's Hayes?" Mara asked. Both men looked at her like she'd asked who the son was. "Victor Hayes," Wyatt said. "Owns half the county, wants the other half. Been trying to buy Iron Ridge for years." "And when Caleb won't sell," Caleb added, voice tight, "Hayes finds other ways to apply pressure." Mara's stomach went cold. Hayes. She knew that name. Knew it from her father's stories, from the old legal documents she'd found in a storage unit after he died, from the handwritten notes that talked about bribes and threats, and a man who took what he wanted and burned the rest. "You got proof?" she asked. "Don't need proof, I know." "Law needs proof." Caleb laughed, bitter and sharp. "Law's in Hayes' pocket. Sheriff, judge, half the county commissioners. You think they're going to help me?" Mara said nothing. Because he was right, and because she'd learned a long time ago that the law only worked for people who could afford it. "So what do we do?" Wyatt asked. Caleb stared out at the empty pasture, jaw working. "We count everything, every head, every piece of equipment, every inch of fence, and we watch. Someone comes on this land again, we make sure they regret it. And if they don't come back, then we lose 2 more, then 4, then everything." He turned toward the truck. "Get the men together. I want eyes on every pasture, every gate. Nobody moves alone." They drove back in silence. Mara watched the land roll past, her mind working through the pieces. Hayes, missing cattle, a ranch bleeding out slow. And somewhere in the middle of it all, buried truth that connected her father to this place in ways Caleb didn't know yet. She needed to find the proof before Hayes burned it all down. And she needed to do it without getting caught. That night, after the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Caleb had locked himself in his office with a bottle and his ledgers, Mara slipped out of the tack room and headed north. The moon was a sliver, barely enough light to see by, but she didn't need much. She'd walked this land in her dreams for 30 years, following her father's stories like a map. The old homestead was supposed to be out here somewhere, the original house, the one built before the Rourkes came and took everything. Her father had talked about it in pieces. A stone foundation, a well, a barn that had burned down in 1962, 3 years before he lost the ranch. She found the foundation after an hour of searching, half buried under scrub and decades of neglect, but still there, still real. Proof that someone had lived here before Caleb's family planted their flag and called it theirs. Mara knelt in the dirt and ran her hands over the stones, cold, rough, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. "What are you doing out here?" She spun, heart hammering. Caleb stood 20 feet away, shotgun in hand, face shadowed. "Couldn't sleep," Mara said. "So you went for a walk. At midnight. In the middle of nowhere." "Yeah." "Try again." She stood slowly, hands visible. "I wanted to see the land." "Why?" "Because I work it. I should know it." Caleb moved closer, gun still raised. "You're lying. You gonna shoot me for walking? Depends on what you're walking toward." He stopped 5 feet away. "This is the old homestead. Been here since before my grandfather bought the place. Hasn't been touched in 60 years. His eyes narrowed. "How'd you know where to find it?" Mara's mind raced. She could lie. Could make up some story about seeing it on a map, hearing about it from someone in town. But Caleb wasn't stupid, and lies only worked when the truth was too complicated to untangle. "Lucky guess," she said. "Bullshit. Believe what you want." "I want the truth." "Then ask a better question." They stared at each other, the night pressing in around them, the ruined foundation sitting between them like evidence at a trial. "Who are you?" Caleb asked quietly. "I told you, Mara Vance." "That's a name, not an answer." "It's all you're getting." His finger moved to the trigger. Not threatening, just ready. People don't show up out of nowhere. They come from somewhere, running from something, running to something. He tilted his head. "Which is it?" "Both." "That's honest, at least." "I'm not your enemy, Rourke." "Then what are you?" Mara took a breath. This was the edge, the moment where she could tell him the truth or bury it deeper. Tell him and lose everything. Bury it and keep lying until the weight crushed her. "Someone trying to survive," she said. "Same as you." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Caleb lowered the gun. "You find what you were looking for?" "Not yet." "But you will." "Yeah, I will." He studied her for another long moment. Then he turned and started walking back toward the house. "Come on." "Where?" "Back. Before you freeze again." He glanced over his shoulder. "And Vance? Next time you want to go for a midnight walk, tell someone. Hayes's men could be out here, and I'd rather not explain to Wyatt why I shot our best worker." Mara followed, heart still hammering, hands shaking from more than cold. He'd almost caught her, almost asked the right question. Next time she might not be so lucky. The week that followed was tense and careful, everyone walking on eggshells, waiting for the next hit. The cattle count stayed steady, but fences kept getting cut, small breaks, easy to miss, like someone was testing their defenses. Mara worked harder than ever, fixing what broke, watching what moved. She started sleeping less, spending her nights piecing together her father's old notes and the ranch's current layout, looking for connections. And she found one: the water rights. Her father's papers mentioned a spring-fed creek that ran through the northern section of the property. Valuable water in a place where drought could kill faster than bullets. But the current maps showed the creek on Hayes land, not Iron Ridge. Someone had moved the boundary, changed the records, stolen the water and the land it fed. If she could prove it, if she could show the original surveys, she could prove her father had been right. Could prove the Rourkes had taken what wasn't theirs. Could destroy Caleb and everything he'd built. The thought made her sick. She was sitting in the tack room, staring at the papers spread across her cot, when Wyatt knocked on the door. "Vance, you in there?" She shoved the papers under her pillow. "Yeah." He opened the door. His face was grim. "Boss wants everyone in the barn, now." "Why?" "Just come." She followed him across the yard. The other men were already there, standing in a loose circle around Caleb, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We got a problem," Caleb said without preamble. "Curtis found tracks this morning, north fence. 3 riders, maybe 4, came through around dawn." "They take anything?" Pete asked. "Not yet, but they're scouting, getting bolder." He looked around the circle. "I need someone to follow them, see where they're going, get proof." "I'll do it," Wyatt said immediately. "No, I need you here." Caleb's eyes landed on Mara. "Vance, you track?" Everyone turned to look at her. "Some," she said carefully. "Some's better than nothing. You up for it?" It was a test. She knew it. Knew he was watching to see if she'd run or freeze or prove herself useful in a way that mattered. "Yeah," she said. "I'm up for it." "Good. Take Cinder. He's fast and he's quiet. Stay out of sight. If you see Hayes' men, you don't engage. You watch and you come back. Understood?" "Understood." "Wyatt, get her a rifle." "Boss, she doesn't need—" "Get her a rifle." Wyatt's jaw tightened, but he went to the gun rack and pulled down a Winchester. He handed it to Mara without a word. She checked the chamber. Loaded, clean, good weight. "You know how to use that?" Old Leo asked. "Yeah." "You ever shot anyone?" The barn went quiet. Mara looked at the old man. "Not yet." He grinned, mean and approving. "That's the right answer." Chatu. She left an hour later, Cinder moving beneath her like dark water, smooth and silent. The tracks were easy to follow, 3 horses, riding lazy, not bothering to hide. They headed northwest toward the boundary where Iron Ridge met Hayes land, and Mara's stomach tightened. If they crossed the creek, she'd lose them. If they saw her, she was dead. She stayed low, using the terrain, keeping Cinder to soft ground where his hooves wouldn't echo. The stallion seemed to understand, moving careful and controlled, ears flicking at every sound. 2 miles in, the riders stopped. Mara pulled Cinder behind a rocky outcrop and dismounted, moving forward on foot. She could hear voices now, low and rough, carried on the wind. Said, "The old man's almost broke." "About damn time. Hayes has been patient long enough." "What's the next move?" "Same as always, take a little here, break a little there, make it hurt." Laughter, cold and ugly. Mara eased closer, rifle in hand, heart pounding. She could see them now, 3 men on horseback, dressed in heavy coats, faces shadowed by hats. One of them was holding something. A map, maybe. Or, her breath caught, legal papers. She could see the letterhead from here, even at a distance. Hayes Land Development Corporation. They were planning something. Something big. "When do we serve him?" one of the men asked. "End of the month. Gives him 30 days to pay or fold. Either way, Hayes gets the land." "And if Rourke fights?" "Then we make sure he can't." Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. She should leave, should get back to the ranch and tell Caleb what she'd heard. But the papers, if she could get those papers. One of the men turned, looking in her direction. Mara froze. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the man's eyes widened. "Hey, someone's—" She ran. Behind her, shouts erupted. Hooves thundered. Mara sprinted back to Cinder, threw herself into the saddle, and kicked hard. The stallion exploded forward. Gunfire cracked the air. A bullet whined past her head too close, and Cinder swerved without her asking, dodging on instinct. "Get her!" Mara leaned low over Cinder's neck, letting him run, trusting him to find the path. The land blurred past. Rocks, scrub, frozen earth. More shots. One clipped a stone beside them, sending sparks flying. She didn't shoot back. Didn't slow down, just rode. The boundary fence appeared ahead, rusted wire strung between crooked posts. No gate, no gap. Cinder didn't hesitate. He gathered himself and jumped. For 1 perfect second, they were airborne, horse and rider suspended against the pale sky, defying gravity and bullets and everything trying to drag them down. Then they landed hard on the other side, Cinder's hooves digging into Iron Ridge soil, and Mara heard the riders behind her pull up short, cursing. They wouldn't follow, not onto Caleb's land. Not yet. She rode another mile before she slowed, letting Cinder breathe, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd gotten out, barely. And she'd learned the truth. Hayes was coming, not with cattle thieves and cut fences, with lawyers and paperwork and the kind of violence that wore a suit. 30 days. That's all Caleb had left. She told him everything. Sat in his office, covered in dust and sweat, and laid out what she'd seen and heard. The riders, the papers, the timeline, the threat. Caleb listened without interrupting, his face getting darker with every word. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the land he was about to lose. 30 days, he said quietly. Yeah. And you're sure? I'm sure. He was silent for a long time. Then he laughed, sharp and bitter. You know what the hell of it is? I knew this was coming. Knew Hayes wouldn't stop until he had everything. I just thought I'd have more time. There's still time. To do what? I can't pay what I owe. Can't fight Hayes in court. Can't even keep my damn cattle from disappearing. He turned to look at her. What do you suggest? Mara took a breath. Fight dirty. What? Hayes is coming at you with lawyers and paperwork. Fine. But he's also sending men to steal your cattle and cut your fences. That's criminal. That's evidence. I can't prove it. Not yet. But if we catch them in the act, if we get photos, recordings, something the law can't ignore, we can force Hayes to back off. Caleb shook his head. You're talking about a trap. I'm talking about survival. Same thing. Then let's survive. He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than exhaustion and anger in his eyes. She saw hope. You'd risk that? He asked. Getting shot at again for a ranch that's not even yours? The question hit harder than it should have, because it was hers, had been once, should be still. But she couldn't say that. Not yet. Yeah, Mara said, I would. Caleb nodded slowly. All right, we set a trap. But we do it my way, and we do it careful. He moved to the desk, pulling out maps and markers. If Hayes' men are hitting the north pasture, that's where we'll wait. We'll move the cattle closer, make it tempting, and when they come, we'll be ready. We'll be ready, he agreed. They spent the next 2 hours planning positions, signals, contingencies. By the time Mara left the office, the sun was setting and her head was spinning with details. But underneath it all was one cold, clear thought. She was helping Caleb fight for land that should have been hers. And when this was over, when Hayes was gone and the ranch was safe, she'd have to tell him the truth. She'd have to destroy the man she was trying to save. The trap was set 3 days later. They moved 15, head to the north pasture, close to the fence. Easy pickings for anyone watching. Then they waited. Mara took position in the rocks above the pasture, rifle across her knees, night vision scope borrowed from Wyatt. Caleb was south with old Leo. Pete and Jess were east. Curtis was back at the ranch, ready to call the sheriff if things went sideways. The night was cold and still. No moon, just stars and darkness and the quiet sounds of cattle settling. Mara's hands were steady on the rifle, but her mind was racing. This was stupid, dangerous, exactly the kind of thing that got people killed. But it was also the only play they had left. At 2 a.m., she heard them. Hooves, quiet, moving careful through the scrub. She raised the scope. 3 riders, just like before, moving toward the cattle with the practiced ease of men who'd done this a dozen times. Mara keyed her radio. Contact, 3 riders, north approach. Caleb's voice crackled back. Hold position. Let them get close. She watched through the scope as the men spread out, circling the herd. One of them had a rope. Another had wire cutters for the fence. They're cutting the fence, Mara whispered. Let them. Caleb, let them. We need them in the act. She gritted her teeth and waited. The fence came down. The men moved in, starting to separate cattle from the herd. Now, Caleb said. Lights exploded across the pasture. Truck headlights, spotlights, every source of illumination they had. The riders' horses spooked, rearing and screaming. Don't move! Caleb's voice boomed across the field. You're on private property. The riders didn't freeze. They ran. God damn it! Caleb's voice cut off as gunfire erupted. The riders were shooting, wild, panicked shots meant to scatter rather than hit. But one bullet found its mark, slamming into a truck's engine with a metallic scream. Return fire! Wyatt yelled. Mara didn't need to be told twice. She sighted on the nearest rider and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the night, and the man jerked in his saddle but didn't fall. Body armor. They're armored, she shouted into the radio. Then aim for the horses. She couldn't do that. Wouldn't. The horses were just animals doing what they were told. Instead, she aimed low, shooting for legs and shoulders, trying to disable rather than kill. The firefight lasted maybe 90 seconds. Then the riders were gone, vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind 2 downed cattle, a broken fence, and wire cutters with fingerprints. Evidence. Caleb emerged from the darkness, rifle still raised, face grim. Everyone okay? Pete's hit, Jess called. Just his arm, but he's bleeding. Get him back to the house. Wyatt, collect everything they left behind. Vance, he turned to look at her. Nice shooting. She lowered her rifle, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Didn't hit anything. You kept them moving. That counts. He looked at the damaged fence, the scattered cattle, the blood on the ground. We got what we needed. Now let's see if it's enough. It wasn't. The sheriff came the next morning, looked at the evidence, took statements, and left without making any arrests. Not enough to move forward, he said, not meeting Caleb's eyes. Could have been anyone. They shot one of my men. And you shot back. Far as I can tell, both sides are guilty. The sheriff tipped his hat. Y'all have a good day now. He drove off, leaving Caleb standing in the yard, fists clenched, face white with fury. He's bought, Wyatt said quietly. I know. So what now? Caleb didn't answer, just turned and walked back into the house. Mara found him an hour later in his office, staring at the maps and papers like they might suddenly reveal a way out. We tried, she said from the doorway. Trying's not enough. Then what is? He looked up at her, and she saw it then. Defeat. Real, bone-deep defeat. The look of a man who'd fought everything and lost anyway. I don't know, he said. Maybe Hayes wins. Maybe that's just how this ends. No. Vance, no, she said again, harder. You don't get to quit. Not now. Not after everything. What else is there? She stepped into the room. The truth. What truth? This was it. The moment she'd been dreading and running toward since the day she arrived. The truth about this land, Mara said, about who it really belongs to, about what Hayes and your family did to get it. Caleb went very still. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the original surveys, the water rights, the deals made in back rooms 30 years ago. She pulled the folded papers from her jacket, her father's papers, the proof she'd been carrying like a loaded gun. I'm talking about the fact that Iron Ridge was stolen, and I can prove it. She laid the papers on his desk. Caleb stared at them like they might bite. Where did you get these? His voice was quiet, dangerous. From my father. Who was your father? Mara took a breath. Daniel Vance, original owner of Iron Ridge Ranch, the man your grandfather cheated out of everything he had. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Caleb stood, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on hers. Get out, he said. Caleb, get the hell out of my house. Listen to me. Now. She went. Mara made it as far as the barn before her legs gave out. She sat down hard on a hay bale, hands shaking. The look on Caleb's face burned into her brain like a brand. She'd seen anger before, plenty of it, but this was different. This was betrayal, the kind that cut deeper than any knife because it came from someone you'd started to trust. She'd done that to him. She'd lied by omission for weeks, worked beside him, ate at his table, slept under his roof, all while carrying proof that could destroy everything he believed about his family and his right to this land. And now he knew. Vance. She looked up. Wyatt stood in the barn doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, his face unreadable. Boss wants you gone by morning, he said. I know. He also said if you set foot on this property after sunrise, he'll have you arrested for trespassing. Mara nodded. Her throat felt too tight to speak. Wyatt stepped closer. That true? What you told him? Yeah. Your old man really owned this place? Yeah. The foreman was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket and held it out. Then you'll want this. Mara took it, unfolded it. It was a photocopy of an old deed, dated 1961, registered to Daniel Vance, for the property now known as Iron Ridge Ranch. Her breath caught. Where did you get this? Found it years ago, in the attic of the old bunkhouse, tucked inside a Bible someone left behind. Didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just paperwork from before the Rourkes bought the place. He shrugged, but I kept it. Don't know why. Just felt wrong to throw it out. Why are you giving it to me? Because if what you're saying is true, you're going to need more than your daddy's word to prove it. And because, he paused, because I've worked for 3 generations of Rourkes, and not one of them ever mentioned buying this land legal. They just said it was theirs. Always bothered me, but I never asked questions. Maybe I should have. Mara stared at the paper, her father's name printed in careful typewriter letters, official and undeniable. Caleb's going to hate you for this, she said. Probably, but I'm tired of lies, even the ones I didn't know I was protecting. Wyatt turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth? You're a hell of a worker, best we've had in years. Wish you'd been honest from the start. Me too. He left. Mara sat alone in the barn, holding the deed like it might dissolve if she let go, and tried to figure out what the hell to do next. She had proof now. Real, documented proof. She could take this to a lawyer, file a claim, fight for what her father had lost. But that would destroy Caleb, would take the ranch he'd bled for and rip it away, leaving him with nothing. And despite everything, despite the lies and the anger and the impossible situation, she didn't want that. She wanted justice. But not revenge. The problem was, she couldn't figure out how to have one without the other. A crash from outside made her jump. She ran to the barn door and froze. The house was on fire. Not the whole thing. Not yet. But flames were climbing the east wall, hungry and fast, feeding on old wood and decades of paint. Black smoke poured from a broken window, and she could hear shouting, Caleb's voice, hoarse and desperate. "Get water! Move!" Mara didn't think. She just ran. The men were already there. Curtis dragging a hose from the well, Pete and Jess hauling buckets, old Leo yelling instructions nobody was following. The fire was spreading faster than they could fight it, jumping from wall to roof, eating everything in its path. "Where's Caleb?" Mara shouted. "Inside," Wyatt pointed. "He went back for the records." "Are you insane? Get him out." "He won't leave without the deed records. Everything's in the office." The office. East side of the house, right where the fire was worst. Mara grabbed the hose from Curtis. "Keep this on the north wall. Don't let it spread to the barn." "What are you—" She was already moving. She soaked herself with water from the trough, wrapped her jacket over her face, and kicked through the front door into hell. The smoke was thick enough to choke on. Heat hit her like a fist, stealing the air from her lungs. She dropped low, crawling through the kitchen toward the hallway, following the sound of Caleb's coughing. "Rourke, get out!" His voice came from the office, ragged and desperate. "The whole place is going. So are you if you don't move." She reached the office door. It was hot to the touch. She kicked it open. Caleb was on his knees beside the filing cabinet, shoving papers into a metal box, his face black with soot. The window behind him was fully engulfed, flames licking across the ceiling. "Leave it!" Mara grabbed his arm. "These are the only records I have. The deed, the mortgage, everything. They're not worth your life. They're worth this ranch." The ceiling groaned. A beam cracked above them, showering sparks. Mara made a choice. She grabbed the metal box, shoved it into Caleb's chest, and hauled him toward the door with strength born from pure terror. They made it 3 steps before the ceiling gave way. Mara saw it coming, had maybe half a second to react. She threw herself forward, shoving Caleb hard. He stumbled through the doorway into the hall. The beam came down right where he'd been standing, crushing the desk, sending up a fountain of embers, and pinning Mara's leg. The pain was instant and absolute. She screamed. "Vance!" Caleb dropped the box and lunged back into the office. "Don't! The fire! Shut up!" He grabbed the beam with both hands and lifted. His face went red. The veins in his neck stood out like cables. The beam didn't move. "Leave me," Mara gasped. "Get out." "Not happening." "Caleb," I said, "shut up." He repositioned, got his shoulder under the beam, and heaved with everything he had. The beam shifted. 1 inch, 2 inches. Mara dragged herself backward, biting down on her scream. Her leg was bleeding, might be broken. Didn't matter, she was free. Caleb let go and the beam crashed down. He grabbed her under the arms and pulled her into the hallway, then kept pulling, dragging her through the smoke toward the front door. They burst out into cold air and chaos. Hands grabbed them, Wyatt, Pete, someone else, hauling them away from the house as the roof collapsed inward with a sound like the world ending. Mara lay on the frozen ground, lungs burning, legs screaming, watching the house that Caleb had fought so hard to keep turn into an inferno. "You stupid, stubborn—" Caleb was beside her, coughing so hard he couldn't finish. "What the hell were you thinking?" "Same thing you were," she managed. "I was saving the ranch. I was saving you." They stared at each other, both filthy and singed and alive. "Your leg," Caleb said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Wyatt, get the truck. We need to get her to a hospital." "I don't need it." That wasn't a request. He stood, swaying slightly, and looked at what was left of his house. The office was gone. Most of the east wing. The roof was caving in section by section, and there was nothing they could do but watch. "Did you get the records?" Wyatt asked quietly. Caleb looked down at the metal box lying in the dirt where he'd dropped it. He picked it up, opened it. Inside were charred papers, some readable, some not. The deed was there, barely. Smoke damaged and singed at the edges, but intact. "Some of them," he said. "Enough?" "I don't know." Mara tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her leg and she hissed. "Stop moving," Caleb ordered. "Someone started that fire." Everyone went still. "What?" Wyatt said. "That fire didn't start itself. It was too fast, too hot, too convenient." She looked at Caleb. "Hayes did this." "You don't know that. Who else? You embarrass his men you refuse to sell. You're still standing when you should be broken. So he burns you out." She gritted her teeth against the pain. This is what he does. This is how he wins. Caleb's face went hard. If that's true, if he's willing to burn me out, then he's not stopping here. No, Mara said, he's not. Which means the barn's next, the cattle, anything that keeps this ranch alive. We need to move them, Wyatt said. Tonight. Get everything valuable off the property before he comes back. Move them where? Nobody had an answer. Mara closed her eyes, thinking through options, locations, safe places. And then it hit her. The old homestead, she said. Caleb looked at her. What? The foundation I found. It's on the north section, miles from here. Hidden. No roads in. Hard to find unless you know it's there. She met his eyes. We move the cattle there, set up a camp, guard them until this is over. That's in the middle of nowhere. No shelter, no water. There's a spring. I saw it when I was scouting, and we can rig shelter. It's not perfect, but it's better than leaving them here to burn. Wyatt nodded slowly. She's right. We spread out, we're vulnerable. We consolidate at a defensible position, we've got a chance. Caleb looked at his burning house, then at his men, then at Mara lying in the dirt with blood soaking through her jeans. All right, he said. We move. Tonight. Wyatt, get the cattle ready. Pete, Jess, load the trucks with everything we can't afford to lose. Leo, you're on watch. Anyone comes up that road, you let me know. What about you, boss? I'm taking Vance to the hospital. Then I'm coming back and we're finishing this. He looked down at Mara. You good to ride in a truck or do I need to call an ambulance? Truck's fine. Liar. Maybe. But we don't have time for ambulances. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he bent down and picked her up like she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the truck while she tried very hard not to pass out from the pain. For the record, he said quietly, you're still fired. For the record, Mara replied, I don't care. Yeah, I figured. They drove to the county hospital in silence. Caleb's hands were tight on the wheel, his jaw working like he was chewing through words he didn't want to say. Finally, halfway there, he spoke. Why'd you come back into the house? Mara looked at him. His face was still black with soot. His eyes were red. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Because you were in there, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. He was quiet for another mile. Then, your father, Daniel Vance, what happened to him? Mara stared out the window at the dark land rolling past. He lost this place when I was 5. Tried to fight it in court, but Hayes and your grandfather had better lawyers. He spent the next 20 years working whatever jobs he could find, trying to save enough to buy it back. Never made it. Died broke and bitter, still swearing the ranch was his. And you believed him. I didn't know what to believe. Not until I found his papers after he died. Then I knew. She turned to look at Caleb. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't a drunk making up stories. He was telling the truth. And your family took everything from him. Caleb's hands tightened on the wheel. My grandfather was a hard man. Mean, sometimes, but he wasn't a thief. Then how'd he get the ranch? He bought it, fair and square. I've seen the papers. You've seen papers. Doesn't mean they're real. You calling my family liars? I'm saying someone lied. Maybe it was Hayes. Maybe it was your grandfather. Maybe they worked together. I don't know. She leaned her head back against the seat. All I know is my father lost everything, and your family got rich off it. We're not rich. In case you hadn't noticed, we're barely surviving. You've got land. That's more than my father ever had after they took it from him. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. So what now? Caleb asked. You've got your proof. You could take me to court, take the ranch, finish what your father started. Yeah, I could. Why haven't you? Mara closed her eyes. Because I don't want to destroy you. I want justice. There's a difference. Is there? I don't know anymore. They pulled up to the hospital. Caleb killed the engine but didn't get out. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry. For what happened to your father. For what my family might have done. For the choice I gave you that first night. He looked at her. You deserved better than that. Yeah, I did. But you chose the porch anyway. Because I wasn't going to let you decide who I was. That was mine to choose. He nodded slowly. You're a hell of a woman, Vance. Stubborn and infuriating and way too brave for your own good. But you're also a liar, and I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if you should. That honest, at least. He got out and came around to her side, helping her down from the truck. She tried to walk and nearly collapsed. Her leg wouldn't hold weight. Lean on me, Caleb said. I can lean on me. She did. They made it through the emergency room doors together, two people held up by stubbornness and spite and something else neither of them wanted to name. The doctor said her leg wasn't broken, just badly bruised and lacerated. They cleaned the wound, bandaged it, gave her painkillers she refused to take, and told her to stay off it for a week. Can't, she said. You need to rest. I need to work. The doctor looked at Caleb. Can you talk sense into her? Nope, Caleb said. Believe me, I've tried. They left the hospital 2 hours later. It was past midnight when they got back to the ranch. The house was still smoking, a skeleton of blackened beams against the stars. But the barn was intact. The cattle were gone. Moved already, Mara guessed. The yard was empty except for Wyatt, sitting on the porch of the bunkhouse with a rifle across his knees. All clear? Caleb called. So far. Cattle are at the homestead. Leo and Curtis are watching them. Pete and Jess are loading the last of the equipment. Good. I want everyone armed and ready. If Hayes comes back, he already did. Caleb froze. What? Wyatt stood. While you were gone. Rolled up with 3 trucks and a lawyer. Tried to serve papers. What kind of papers? Foreclosure notice? Immediate seizure of assets. Says you defaulted on a loan I didn't even know you had. Caleb's face went white. That's impossible. I don't have any loans with Hayes. Well, he's got papers that say you do, and a judge's signature. Forged. Probably. But they look real enough. Wyatt handed over the documents. He gave you 72 hours to vacate. After that, he's bringing the sheriff and taking possession by force. Caleb read the papers, his face getting darker with every line. Then he crumpled them in his fist. 3 days, he said. 3 days, Wyatt confirmed. That son of a bitch. Mara leaned against the truck, her leg throbbing, her mind racing. 72 hours. That's all they had. 3 days to prove fraud, expose Hayes, and save a ranch that might not even be Caleb's to save. We need a lawyer, she said. Can't afford one. Then we need leverage. Like what? Mara looked at him. Like the truth. All of it. Not just what Hayes did, what your grandfather did. What really happened 30 years ago. You want me to help you prove my family stole this land. I want you to help me prove Hayes was part of it. Because if he was, if we can show he and your grandfather worked together to forge those original deeds, then both claims are invalid. Yours and his. Which means the land reverts to the original owner. Your father. Who's dead. Which means it goes to his heir. She met his eyes. Me. Caleb stared at her. You want me to hand you the ranch? I want us to save it from Hayes, together, and after that, she took a breath. After that, we figure out who it really belongs to. And if it's you, then we negotiate. Negotiate what? A partnership. You've got the knowledge and the crew. I've got the legal claim. We work together. We might actually keep this place alive. Wyatt let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a gamble. You got a better idea? Mara asked. He didn't. Caleb looked at his burned house, his exhausted foreman, and the woman who'd lied to him and saved his life in the same night. All right, he said. We do this. But not here. Hayes knows where we are. We need to move, get to the homestead, regroup, and figure out our next play. What about the ranch? Wyatt asked. Let him have it. The buildings, anyway. He wants dirt and ash. He can take it. But the land, the real land, the parts that matter, we're taking with us. He looked at Mara. Can you ride? Can you stop asking stupid questions? He smiled. It wasn't much, but it was real. Get in the truck. We've got work to do. They loaded what they could, tools, weapons, food, documents, and headed north into the darkness. The homestead was exactly where Mara had said it would be, a forgotten piece of history hidden in the folds of the land. The cattle were already there, circled by Pete and Jess on horseback. Old Leo had rigged a camp, tarps for shelter, a fire pit, water from the spring. It wasn't much, but it was defensible, and it was theirs. For now, Caleb stood at the edge of the camp, looking back toward where his house used to be. Mara came up beside him, limping on her bad leg. "You okay?" she asked. "No, but I will be." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Same." They stood in silence, two people who'd been enemies and allies and something in between, watching the horizon for threats that hadn't arrived yet. "When this is over," Caleb said quietly, "we're going to have a long talk about trust." "Yeah, we are, and about who you really are." "I've told you who I am." "No, you've told me your name and your history. That's not the same thing." He turned to face her. "Who are you, Mara Vance?" "Really?" She thought about it. About the girl who'd lost everything, the woman who'd survived anyway, the stranger who'd chosen the porch and stayed to fight. "I'm someone who refuses to quit," she said, "even when I probably should." "Yeah," Caleb said. "I noticed." Somewhere in the distance, an engine rumbled. Headlights cut through the dark, moving fast toward the ranch they'd abandoned. Hayes was coming. But they weren't there anymore. And for the first time since this whole mess started, they had something Hayes didn't expect: each other. The headlights stopped at the ranch gate. 3 trucks. Maybe more. Hard to tell from this distance. Mara stood beside Caleb on the ridge overlooking the homestead, binoculars pressed to her eyes, counting vehicles and men. "How many?" Caleb asked. 6 that I can see. Could be more in the trucks." "Armed?" "Probably. Hayes doesn't send Boy Scouts." Below them, the camp was quiet but tense. The cattle huddled near the spring, nervous from the move. The men sat around the fire, weapons close, waiting for orders that hadn't come yet. "They're searching the property," Mara said, "looking for us." "Let them look. By the time they figure out we're gone, we'll be long past planning our next move." "And what is our next move?" Caleb lowered his own binoculars. "We prove Hayes forged those loan papers. Prove he's been working with corrupt officials. Prove everything. In 72 hours. 70 now. We're burning time." Mara lowered her binoculars and looked at him. "You know what we need, right? To prove all this?" "Evidence. Evidence that's locked in Hayes' office, in his files, on his computers." She paused. "We need someone on the inside." Caleb's jaw tightened. "No." "It's the only way." "I said no. It's too dangerous." "Everything we've done has been dangerous. This is just one more risk." "One that could get you killed." "Me, specifically?" He looked at her. "You're the only one who could pull it off. You're smart, you think fast, and Hayes doesn't know who you are. Yet." "Exactly, which means I can get close." "And do what? Walk into his office and ask to see his fraud files?" "No, I walk into his office and offer him something he wants." "Like what?" Mara took a breath. "Information. About you, about the ranch, about where you're hiding and how close you are to breaking." Caleb stared at her. "You want to pretend to betray me?" "I want to give Hayes exactly what he expects, a desperate woman willing to sell out her boss for the right price. People like Hayes, they see betrayal coming because it's what they do. Makes it easy to believe. And when he asks for proof, when he wants to know where we are, I give him the ranch, the burned-out shell he already knows about. Tell him you're hiding there, trying to salvage what's left. By the time he figures out I lied, we'll have what we need." Wyatt climbed up the ridge to join them. "Trucks are leaving. Looks like they're giving up for tonight." "They'll be back," Caleb said. "I know. Which is why we need to move fast." Wyatt looked between them. "What's the plan?" "Vance wants to infiltrate Hayes' operation." "Alone?" "Alone," Mara confirmed. Wyatt shook his head. "That's suicide. It's necessity. We need proof. This is how we get it. And if Hayes sees through you, then I improvise. That's not a plan. It's the best we've got." Caleb turned away, looking out at the dark expanse of land that might not be his, might be hers, might belong to neither of them if Hayes had his way. "If we do this," he said quietly, "we do it smart. You go in wired, we track you. First sign of trouble, we pull you out. Hayes will check for wires. Then we put the tracker somewhere he won't find." Mara thought about it. "My boot, sewn into the heel." "That could work. Wyatt, you still got that GPS tracker from when we were monitoring the cattle?" "Yeah, small enough to hide, strong enough to track for miles." "Get it. We've got work to do. They spent the next 3 hours preparing. Wyatt pulled apart one of Mara's boots and embedded the tracker in the heel, sealing it so well you couldn't tell it was there unless you knew to look. Pete found a wire so thin it could pass for a necklace chain, with a mic no bigger than a shirt button. Old Leo contributed a knife, small and sharp, that fit in a hidden pocket Jess sewed into Mara's jacket lining. Just in case, Leo said. In case of what? In case talking doesn't work. By dawn, Mara looked like what she needed to be. A ranch hand down on her luck, angry at her boss, desperate enough to deal. She caught her reflection in the side mirror of the truck and barely recognized herself. Tired eyes, hard mouth, the look of someone who'd been pushed too far. It wasn't much of a stretch. Remember, Caleb said as she climbed into the truck. You're there to get information. Nothing heroic, nothing stupid. You get in, you get proof, you get out. I know. And if something goes wrong, then you come get me. I know that too. He grabbed her arm. Mara, I mean it. This goes sideways. You run. Don't try to fight them. Don't try to be brave. Just run and we'll find you. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, probably hadn't. I'll be careful, she said. You better be. She started to pull away, but he didn't let go. What? She asked. Just... He stopped. Started again. Just come back, all right? Something in her chest twisted. All right. He let go. She drove away, watching him get smaller in the rearview mirror until he was just a silhouette against the sunrise, and then nothing at all. Hayes Land Development Corporation sat on the edge of town like a monument to greed, all glass and steel and money. 3 stories of power in a place where most buildings struggled to reach 2. Mara parked the truck 2 blocks away and walked the rest, favoring her good leg, trying not to limp. The lobby was marble and cold. A receptionist sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Caleb made in a year. Help you? The woman's smile was professionally empty. I need to see Mr. Hayes. Do you have an appointment? No, but I've got information he wants. About Caleb Rourke and Iron Ridge Ranch. The smile froze. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes doesn't meet with walk-ins. Tell him Mara Vance is here. Tell him I worked for Rourke. Tell him I know where he's hiding and what he's planning. She leaned on the desk. Tell him if he wants Iron Ridge without a fight, he'll want to hear what I have to say. The receptionist's finger hovered over the phone. Wait here. Mara waited. She counted the security cameras, 4 that she could see, probably more hidden. Noted the exits. The guards. The elevator that required a key card to operate. Getting out was going to be harder than getting in. 5 minutes later, the elevator opened and a man stepped out. Not Hayes, too young, too clean, lawyer probably, or an assistant with delusions of importance. Miss Vance? Mr. Hayes will see you now. She followed him into the elevator. 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like expensive cologne and older money. The assistant led her to a corner office with windows overlooking half the county. Victor Hayes sat behind a desk the size of a small car, reading something on his phone. He didn't look up when she entered. Sit, he said. Mara sat. Hayes finished whatever he was reading, set down the phone, and finally looked at her. He was older than she'd expected, mid-60s maybe, with silver hair and a face that had learned to smile without meaning it. You're the one who's been causing problems for my men, he said. I'm the one who's been working for Rourke. Worked? Past tense. What changed? He doesn't pay, doesn't listen, thinks he can fight you and win. She shrugged. I'm smarter than that. Smart enough to walk into my office and offer information, or stupid enough to think I'll pay for it. He leaned back in his chair. Which is it? Smart enough to know you want that ranch, and I can give it to you without a legal fight that drags on for months. I already have the legal fight won. 72 hours, and it's mine. You have a piece of paper. Rourke has lawyers coming, has evidence, has enough to tie you up in court long enough that your investors start asking questions. She paused. Unless you can prove he's given up, abandoned the property, walked away. Hayes' eyes narrowed. And you can arrange that? I can tell you where he is, what he's planning, how close he is to breaking. She leaned forward. And I can tell you where he's got his cattle hidden, the only assets he has left. You take those, he's got nothing to fight with. Why would you give me that? Because he fired me. Threw me off the property after I saved his life. I risked everything for him, and he couldn't even pay me what he owed. The anger in her voice wasn't entirely fake. So now I'm done. He wants to lose everything? Fine, I'll help him. Hayes studied her. She could see him calculating, weighing risks, looking for the lie. What do you want? He asked. 10,000, cash, and a job. A job. You're going to need someone who knows that land, who knows how to run cattle, who can manage a ranch. She met his eyes. Hire me to run Iron Ridge after you take it. I'll make sure it's profitable. Make sure it's worth what you paid. Hayes laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. I've got information you need. The nerve's just a bonus. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town he owned. Where's Rourke hiding? The old homestead, north section. About 5 miles from the main ranch. He's got the cattle there, his men, everything. How many men? 5. Plus him, all armed. And he's planning to fight? He's planning to run. Soon as he figures out you've got the ranch locked down, he'll scatter. Take the cattle, sell them cheap, disappear. She paused. Unless you get there first. Hayes turned to look at her. If you're lying, then you lose nothing but time. If I'm telling the truth, you get everything. And you get your money, and my job. He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded to his assistant. Pay her 5,000. She gets the rest when I confirm she's telling the truth. That wasn't the deal. That's the deal now. Take it or leave. Mara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Fine. The assistant left, came back 5 minutes later with an envelope thick with cash. He handed it to her like it was contaminated. Pleasure doing business, Hayes said. Marcus will show you out. When do you move on the homestead? That's not your concern. It is if I'm supposed to be running the place after. Hayes smiled. Tomorrow night, after dark. We'll have the cattle and Rourke in custody before he knows what hit him. He walked back to his desk. You'll get a call when it's done. And Miss Vance? If you've lied to me, I'll make sure you regret it. I'm counting on it, Mara said. She left the office with $5,000 and a wire recording of Hayes admitting to everything. The tracker in her boot was still broadcasting. The knife in her jacket was still hidden. And she had less than 24 hours to get back to Caleb and warn him that Hayes was coming with everything he had. She made it to the truck before the shaking started, adrenaline dump, fear catching up with anger. She sat behind the wheel, breathing hard, trying to calm down. The passenger door opened. Mara's hand went to the knife. Easy, Wyatt said, sliding into the seat. It's me. You followed me? Caleb's orders, in case things went bad. He looked at her. Did they? Got the recording? Got the timeline? Hayes is moving tomorrow night. That's good. It's not enough. We've got proof he's planning to steal the cattle, but that's not the same as proving fraud on the original deeds. We need more. Then we go back in. I can't go back in. He's watching. Marcus walked me out. By now they've got my license plate, probably running background checks. Then I'll go. You're not exactly undercover material, Wyatt grinned. No, but I know someone who is. 30 minutes later, they were back at the homestead, playing the recording for Caleb and the crew. Hayes's voice filled the camp, arrogant and clear, admitting to plans that would hold up in court if they could get the recording to the right people. This is good, Caleb said, but Vance is right. It's not enough. We need the original fraud, the proof that Hayes and my grandfather worked together. How do we get that? Pete asked. Hayes's private files, Mara said. He's got an office safe. Saw it when I was in there. Old combination lock, probably hasn't been changed in years. You know how to crack a safe? No, but I know someone who does. Everyone turned to look at old Leo. The old man shrugged. I was young once. Did some things I'm not proud of. Safe cracking was one of them. Can you still do it? Caleb asked. If my hands hold steady and the safe's not electronic, but I'll need time and quiet. You'll have neither, Wyatt said. Security's tight. Guards rotate every 4 hours. Cameras everywhere. Then we create a distraction, Mara said. Like what? She looked at Caleb. Like me. Going back. Telling Hayes I need to talk. That I've got more information. No, Caleb said immediately. You just got out. You go back now, he'll know something's wrong. Not if I bring him what he wants. She pulled the envelope of cash from her pocket. I give this back. Tell him I can't do it. That I need out of the deal. He'll never buy that. He'll buy it if I'm scared enough, if I convince him Rourke's onto me, that I need protection. Caleb shook his head. It's too dangerous. It's the only play we've got. I distract Hayes, get him focused on me. While he's busy, Leo slips in through the back, cracks the safe, and gets the files. And if you can't distract him long enough, then Leo improvises, or we all run. She looked around the circle. We've got one shot at this. One chance to prove everything before Hayes takes this land and buries the truth for good. I'm not saying it's a great plan, but it's what we've got. The silence that followed was heavy with calculation and fear. Finally, Caleb spoke. If we do this, we do it tonight, before Hayes moves on the homestead. We get in, get proof, and get out before he knows we were there. Tonight, Mara agreed. And someone goes with Leo, backup in case it goes wrong. I'll go, Curtis said quietly. Everyone looked at the kid. He'd been silent through most of this, just watching and learning, but now his face was set with determination that made him look older. You sure? Caleb asked. I'm tired of running, tired of watching Hayes take everything. I want to fight back. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. Curtis and Leo, you're on the safe. Wyatt, Pete, Jess, you're outside. Eyes on exits. First sign of trouble, we pull everyone out. What about you, boss? Wyatt asked. I'm going with Vance. If Hayes wants to hear her story, he's hearing mine too. That's suicide. That's partnership. He looked at Mara. We started this together. We finish it together. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to stay safe, stay hidden, stay alive. But she knew that look, knew he'd made up his mind the way he made up every mind, stubborn and final. Together, she said. They moved at dusk. 2 trucks, one carrying Mara and Caleb toward Hayes' office, the other carrying Leo and Curtis to the back entrance they'd scouted earlier. The plan was simple, probably too simple, but simple plans broke less often than complicated ones. Mara walked into Hayes' building at 7 p.m., right when the security shift changed. Caleb waited outside in the truck, ready to move if things went wrong. The receptionist was different this time, younger, less suspicious. Can I help you? I need to see Mr. Hayes. It's urgent. He's in a meeting. Tell him Mara Vance is here. Tell him we've got a problem. 5 minutes later, she was back in his office. Hayes looked irritated. This better be important. Rourke knows. Mara set the envelope on his desk. About me. About the deal. I don't know how, but he knows. And he's coming for me. Hayes opened the envelope, counted the money. You're returning my payment? I'm returning everything. I want out. You don't get out. We had a deal. The deal's off. You want the homestead location? You've got it. You want your money back? There it is. But I'm done. You look scared. I'm scared. Rourke's not just some rancher. She stopped, let her voice shake. He knows things. About where I came from. About why I'm here. And if he gets to me before you shut him down, he won't. How do you know? Because I'm moving tonight, 2 hours from now. By midnight, Rourke and his men will be in custody and you'll be safe. Mara's blood went cold. Tonight? You said tomorrow. Ooh, I changed the timeline. Can't trust Rourke to stay put. He studied her. Why? Does that scare you more? No, I need time. To get clear, to get somewhere safe. You're safe here. I'm safe nowhere until Rourke's finished. Hayes smiled. Then you'll be happy to know this is almost over. He picked up his phone. Marcus, send security to escort Miss Vance to the holding room. She's staying here until the operation's complete. Mara's stomach dropped. You're keeping me here for your protection, like you asked. He nodded to the door. They'll take good care of you. The security guard appeared. Big, armed, not the kind you argued with. Mara stood slowly, mind racing. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to distract Hayes, then leave, give Leo time to crack the safe and get out. But now she was trapped, and Leo was running out of time. She let the guard lead her down the hall to a small room with no windows and a locked door. He put her inside and locked it behind her. Mara waited 10 seconds. Then she pulled out the knife. The lock was cheap. Commercial grade. Easy to pick if you knew what you were doing. Her father had taught her when she was 12, said you never knew when you'd need to get through a locked door in a hurry. He'd been right. She had the door open in 90 seconds. Slipped into the hall. No guards, no cameras she could see. She moved quick and quiet, heading for the back stairwell where Leo and Curtis should be working. She found them on the third floor, outside Hayes' private office. Leo had the safe open. Curtis was pulling files, photographing them with a phone, hands shaking. "We gotta go," Mara whispered. "Hayes moved up the timeline. He's moving on the homestead in 2 hours." Leo swore. "We're not done." "You're done enough. Get what you've got and move." "There's more. Documents going back 30 years. Proof of everything. And we're out of time. Grab what you can. Now." Curtis shoved files into a backpack. Leo closed the safe, spun the dial, made it look untouched. They moved toward the stairwell. Alarms screamed. Someone had found the empty holding room, or seen them on a camera they'd missed. Didn't matter. They were blown. "Run!" Mara shouted. They ran. Down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind them, footsteps pounded. Voices yelled. The building was waking up. They hit the ground floor. The back exit was 30 feet away. 20. 10. The door burst open. Guards poured in, armed, ready. Mara, Leo, and Curtis skidded to a stop. "Nobody move!" The lead guard had his weapon up, aimed center mass. Mara raised her hands. Beside her, Leo and Curtis did the same. This was it. They were caught. The files in Curtis's backpack might as well be evidence against them now. Then the front windows exploded inward. Caleb's truck came through in a shower of glass and screaming metal, engine roaring, and skidded to a stop right between Mara and the guards. "Get in!" Caleb yelled. She didn't hesitate. Grabbed Curtis, shoved him toward the truck. Leo was already moving. They piled into the bed as Caleb threw it in reverse. Gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked off metal. The back window shattered. "Go, go, go!" Mara screamed. Caleb floored it. The truck shot backward through the broken windows, across the sidewalk, into the street. He spun the wheel, threw it into drive, and they were gone, tires smoking, leaving chaos behind. In the truck bed, Mara lay flat, heart hammering, Curtis beside her, clutching the backpack like it contained salvation. Maybe it did. "Everyone alive?" Caleb shouted from the cab. "Alive!" Mara yelled back. "We got it?" Curtis held up the backpack. "We got it!" They drove hard and fast, leaving town, heading for the homestead. Behind them, sirens wailed. Hayes would be coming, with everything he had. But they had the proof now. 30 years of fraud and corruption, documented and photographed. The question was whether they'd live long enough to use it. They made it 3 miles before the first truck appeared in the rearview mirror. Caleb saw it coming. Headlights cutting through the dust they'd kicked up, closing fast. He pushed the accelerator harder, but his truck was old and overloaded, and whoever was behind them had newer equipment and nothing to lose. "Company!" he yelled. Mara twisted in the truck bed to look. 2 vehicles now. Maybe 3. Hard to tell in the dark. "How far to the homestead?" Curtis shouted. "Too far!" The lead truck pulled alongside them. Mara caught a glimpse of the driver, one of Hayes' men from the raid, face hard with purpose. He swerved toward them, trying to force Caleb off the road. Caleb cut the wheel right, then left, fighting for control. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming on gravel. "Hold on!" he roared. The chase vehicle rammed them. Metal shrieked. The whole truck shuddered. Curtis lost his grip and nearly went over the side. Mara grabbed his jacket and hauled him back. "The files!" he gasped. The backpack was sliding toward the edge. Mara lunged for it, fingers closing on the strap just as the truck hit another pothole. She dragged it back, clutching it to her chest. 30 years of truth. Everything they needed to destroy Hayes if they survived the next 5 minutes. Another vehicle pulled up on the passenger side. This one had a shooter leaning out the window, pistol raised. "Get down!" Mara screamed. Gunfire cracked. Bullets punched through the truck's side panels. One took out a taillight. Another shattered what was left of the back window. Caleb swerved hard, throwing the shooters off balance. But there were more of them than him, and they weren't giving up. "We need to lose them," Mara yelled. "I'm open to suggestions." She looked ahead. They were approaching the rocky terrain near the northern boundary, the same area she'd jumped with Cinder. Rough ground, lots of cover, but only if they could reach it before getting shot to pieces. "The canyon!" she shouted. "Cut through the canyon! That's a dead end! Trust me!" For half a second, Caleb hesitated. Then he cranked the wheel hard left, leaving the road and plunging into the scrubland. The trucks behind them tried to follow. One made it, the other two got caught on rocks and had to slow down. They bounced over terrain that wasn't meant for vehicles, the truck's suspension screaming in protest. Mara's injured leg slammed against the truck bed, and she bit back a scream. Beside her, Leo was hanging on with white knuckles, and Curtis looked like he was praying. The canyon loomed ahead, a narrow gap between two rock formations, barely wide enough for the truck. "You sure about this?" Caleb yelled. "No!" He hit the gap at 40 miles an hour. The side mirrors scraped rock on both sides, then snapped off completely. The truck squeezed through by inches, metal grinding, and burst out the other side into an open area Mara remembered from her scouting. Behind them, the pursuing truck tried to follow, got wedged, stuck fast. They'd lost one, but there were still more coming the long way around. "Now what?" Caleb demanded. Mara looked at the terrain. The homestead was north, but Hayes knew they were going there, probably had men already moving to cut them off. Going back to camp meant leading the enemy straight to the cattle and the rest of the crew. They needed somewhere else, somewhere defensible, somewhere Hayes wouldn't expect. "The old mining road," she said suddenly, 3 miles west, leads up into the hills. "What's up there?" "Caves. High ground. Cover." She looked at him through the shattered window. "And a way to contact the federal authorities without Hayes intercepting the call." "How do you know there's—" "Because my father worked those mines before he lost the ranch. He told me about the emergency radio setup the mining company left behind. If it's still there, we can call for help." "That's a lot of ifs. You got a better idea?" He didn't. Caleb changed course, heading west. The remaining pursuit vehicles were still coming, but they'd gained distance. Maybe enough. They found the mining road right where Mara said it would be, overgrown and forgotten, barely visible in the dark. Caleb took it, the truck climbing steep switchbacks, engine laboring. At the top they found the caves. Old mine shafts, really. Abandoned since the 70s, dangerous and dark, but defensible. They piled out of the truck. Mara's leg nearly gave out when she hit the ground, and Curtis had to steady her. "Everyone okay?" Caleb asked. "Define okay," Leo muttered, but he was moving, which meant he was alive. They could hear engines in the distance. Getting closer. "Into the caves," Caleb ordered. "Leo, Curtis, take the files and find that radio. If it works, call the FBI field office in Casper. Tell them we have evidence of fraud, corruption, and attempted murder by Victor Hayes. Tell them to send everything." "What about you?" Curtis asked. "We're buying you time." Caleb looked at Mara. "You up for one more fight?" She checked her knife. Still there. "Always." Wyatt's voice crackled over the radio they'd taken from the truck. "Boss, you copy?" Caleb grabbed the radio. "Copy. What's your position?" "At the homestead with the cattle. Hayes' men just showed up. 6 trucks. Maybe 20 men. They're surrounding the place." "Can you hold them?" "Not for long. Not against those numbers." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then don't. Scatter the cattle, take the men, and head for the western ridge. We'll meet you there." "What about you? We've got the evidence, and we're about to make sure Hayes never touches this land again." He paused. "Trust me, Wyatt." A long silence. Then, "Always have, boss. Don't make me regret it." The radio went dead. Mara looked toward the cave entrance where Curtis and Leo had disappeared. "They find that radio, this is over. Hayes goes down, the land claims get sorted, and everyone gets to walk away. And if they don't find it, then we hold this position until Hayes runs out of men or we run out of bullets." She met his eyes. "Either way, we're not running anymore." Caleb nodded. "Good. I'm tired of running." They took positions behind rocks overlooking the narrow road. It was the only approach to the caves. Anyone coming up would be exposed, vulnerable. It wasn't much of an advantage, but it was what they had. The first truck appeared 10 minutes later. Then another. 4 in total, moving slow and careful, headlights cutting through the darkness. They stopped 50 yards out. Doors opened. Men poured out. Hayes' security, armed with rifles and shotguns, moving like they'd done this before. And then Hayes himself stepped out of the lead truck. Even from this distance, Mara could see his face. Calm, controlled, confident. He thought he'd already won. A loudspeaker crackled. Hayes' voice boomed across the rocks. "Rourke, I know you're up there. This is over. Come down and we'll talk." Caleb didn't respond. You've got nowhere to go. My men are at your camp. Your cattle are surrounded. You're finished. Still nothing. Hayes' voice hardened. You've got 60 seconds to surrender. After that, we're coming up, and I promise you, it won't be gentle. Mara looked at Caleb. What do we do? He thought for a moment. Then he stood up, hands visible, no weapon. Caleb, Mara hissed. Wait! He walked to the edge of the rocks where Hayes could see him clearly. You want to talk, Hayes? Let's talk. Just you and me. Leave your men down there. Hayes laughed. You think I'm stupid enough to walk into a trap? You're stupid enough to think you've won, but you haven't. Not yet. I have the ranch. I have the cattle. I have everything. You have nothing, Caleb's voice echoed off the rocks. Because I've got proof, documents from your safe, evidence of every crime you've committed for the last 30 years, fraud, bribery, conspiracy, all of it. The loudspeaker went silent. When Hayes spoke again, his voice was different, lower, dangerous. You're bluffing. Am I? Want to take that chance? Because right now my people are transmitting those documents to the FBI. And once they have them, you're finished. Your empire, your deals, everything you've built on, lies. You're lying. Then call my bluff. Send your men up here. Storm these caves. And while you're doing it, federal agents will be arresting everyone you've ever bribed. Caleb paused. Or you can walk away. Leave now. Disappear before this gets worse. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Hayes started walking forward, alone, no weapons visible. His men stayed back, uncertain. That's far enough, Caleb called when Hayes reached the halfway point. Hayes stopped. Show me. Show me the proof. Not a chance. Then how do I know you're not lying? From inside the cave, Curtis's voice suddenly echoed. I got it. The radio works. Hayes' face went white. Last chance, Hayes, Caleb shouted. Walk away or go to prison. Your choice. But Hayes wasn't looking at Caleb anymore. He was looking past him, at the cave entrance. And his expression shifted from fear to calculation to something worse. Triumph. No, he said quietly. I don't think I will. He turned and nodded to his men. They opened fire. Bullets tore through the air. Mara grabbed Caleb and yanked him down behind cover as the rocks around them exploded into fragments. The sound was deafening, a dozen rifles firing at once, sustained and brutal. Get to the cave, Caleb roared. They ran, bent low, as gunfire chased them. Made it to the entrance just as a bullet sparked off the rock inches from Mara's head. Inside, Curtis was at an old radio setup, microphone in hand, frantically broadcasting. This is Curtis Webb calling any federal authority. We have evidence of corruption. Send help to the old Redstone mining road. We're under attack. Static. Then a voice. This is FBI Special Agent Michelle Torres. Repeat your location. Redstone Mining Road, north of Iron Ridge Ranch. Victor Hayes is here with armed men. We have documents proving an explosion cut him off. The cave shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Outside, someone had thrown a grenade, not into the cave, but near enough to make a point. Hayes' voice boomed again. You want to play this game, Rourke? Fine. We'll bury you in there. Another explosion, closer this time. The cave entrance started to collapse. We need to get out, Leo yelled. There's another exit. Mara pointed deeper into the mine. Back shaft comes out on the other side of the hill. How do you know? Because my father told me. He worked these mines. He knew every tunnel. They ran deeper, using flashlights from the emergency kit, moving through darkness that smelled like earth and time. Behind them, the explosions continued, systematic and methodical. Hayes was trying to seal them in, but he didn't know about the back entrance. They found it 200 yards in, a narrow shaft that climbed up at a steep angle, barely wide enough for a person. Handholds had been carved into the rock decades ago, worn smooth by generations of miners. Up, Caleb ordered. Curtis first, then Leo, Mara. What about you? I'm last. Move. They climbed. Curtis went fast, young and agile. Leo slower, his old hands struggling with the holds. Mara was in the middle, her injured leg screaming with every pull. Below them, the main tunnel filled with dust and the sound of collapsing rock. Above them, night air and stars. They emerged on the hillside behind the caves, away from Hayes' men. For a moment, they just lay there, gasping, covered in dust, alive. Then Mara heard it. Helicopters. She looked up. 3 of them, running lights bright against the dark sky, coming in fast from the east. FBI, Curtis croaked. They came. The helicopters swept over the mining road. Spotlights exploded across Hayes' position. A loudspeaker voice boomed, "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Chaos erupted below. Hayes' men scattered. Some dropped their guns. Others tried to run. The helicopters herded them back, and within minutes, vehicles were pouring in. FBI, state police, federal marshals. Hayes stood in the middle of it all, frozen, watching his empire collapse in real time. From their position on the hill, Mara watched federal agents put Hayes in handcuffs, watched them load him into a vehicle, watched 30 years of corruption end in a single night. "We did it," Curtis whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "We did." But Mara wasn't celebrating, because the hard part was still coming, the part where they figured out who actually owned the land they'd just saved. The FBI took statements for 6 hours. They sat in a federal building in Casper, exhausted and filthy, going over everything that had happened. The documents from Hayes' safe were logged as evidence. The recording of Hayes admitting his plans was authenticated. Agents fanned out across the county, arresting officials, seizing records, unraveling decades of conspiracy. By sunrise, the scope of it was clear. Hayes hadn't just been stealing land, he'd been running a criminal enterprise, bribing judges, falsifying deeds, threatening anyone who got in his way. And it had all started 30 years ago with a deal between Hayes and Caleb's grandfather to steal Iron Ridge Ranch from Daniel Vance. The proof was in the documents. The original surveys showing the true boundaries, the forged deed transfers, the payments from Hayes to corrupt officials, all of it. And sitting in the middle of it all was the question nobody wanted to ask. Who owned Iron Ridge now? Special Agent Torres sat across from Caleb and Mara in an interview room. She looked tired but satisfied. This case would make her career. "Based on what we've found," she said, "the original deed to Iron Ridge Ranch was never legally transferred from Daniel Vance, which means the Rourke family's claim is invalid, as is Victor Hayes' claim." Caleb's face was stone. "So what happens now?" "The land reverts to the legal heir of Daniel Vance." Torres looked at Mara. "Which, according to the records, is you, Miss Vance." The silence in the room was absolute. "You knew," Caleb said quietly. Not a question, a statement. "Yeah," Mara said, "I knew. From the beginning. From before the beginning. That's why I came." She looked at him. "My father died believing he'd been cheated. I came to prove he was right. I came to take back what was stolen. And then I met you. And your crew, and I realized it wasn't that simple." She took a breath. "You didn't steal the land. Your grandfather did. You've been bleeding for a place you thought was yours, trying to save it, trying to make it work. That's not the same as being a thief. But it's still built on a lie." "Yeah, it is." Caleb stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over a town that was waking up to news of the biggest corruption scandal in county history. "So you take the ranch," he said. "It's yours by law, by right. My crew goes, I go, and you get what you came for." "I don't want that." "Then what do you want?" Mara stood. Her leg throbbed, but she ignored it. "I want what my father wanted, justice, truth, but not revenge." She crossed to stand beside him. "I want to offer you a partnership." Caleb turned to look at her. "A what?" "The land is mine, legally. But the knowledge is yours. You know how to run it. You know the cattle, the seasons, the market. You've got a crew that's loyal and good." She paused. "I can own it, but you can run it. 50-50 partnership. We rebuild Iron Ridge together, make it what it was supposed to be." "Why would you do that?" "Because I learned something these last few months. Ownership isn't the same as belonging. My father owned this land on paper, but you belong to it. You fought for it, bled for it, almost died for it." She met his eyes. "That counts for something. You could just take it all. I couldn't stop you." "I know, but that's not who I want to be." She held out her hand. "Partners?" Caleb looked at her hand, then at her face, then out at the land that had defined his whole life. My grandfather was a bastard, he said quietly. I always knew it, just didn't know how much. He looked back at her. You could hate me for that, for what he did. I could, but that's not who I want to be either. He took her hand, shook it. Partners. Agent Torres cleared her throat. I'll need that in writing, for the legal record. You'll have it, Mara said, along with a request. We want to hire back everyone who worked for Hayes under duress, clean the county records, make sure anyone else he stole from gets justice too. Torres smiled. That's already in motion. This case is going to change a lot of things around here. Good, Caleb said. It's about time. They walked out of the federal building into morning light. Wyatt was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against the truck, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Boss, he said when he saw Caleb. Then he saw Mara, and his expression changed. Ma'am. It's still Vance, she said. Or Mara. Your choice. What happened in there? Caleb looked at Mara. She nodded. The ranch is hers, Caleb said. Always was. But she's offered me a partnership, 50-50. We run it together. Wyatt processed this. And the crew? Keeps their jobs, if they want them. They'll want them, Wyatt studied Mara. You really doing this? After everything? Yeah, I am. Why? She thought about it, about the choice she'd made that first night on the porch, about every choice since then, about what her father had really wanted, not revenge, but restoration. Not to destroy the Rourkes, but to reclaim what was stolen and build something better. Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, she said. And I'm tired of poison. I want something that grows instead of something that rots. Wyatt nodded slowly, then he held out his hand. Welcome to Iron Ridge, boss. She shook it. Which boss are you talking to? Both of you. Guess we've got two now. They drove back to the homestead together. The cattle were scattered, but safe. The men were exhausted, but alive. And when they heard the news that Hayes was in custody, that the ranch was saved, that they still had jobs, something like hope settled over the camp. It took 3 months to sort out the legal mess. During that time, they rebuilt. Not the house. That was gone. Burned to the foundation. But the barn got fixed, the fences got repaired properly, the cattle herd grew. And slowly, carefully, Iron Ridge started to look like a working ranch again. Mara moved into the old tack room permanently, turned it into a small cabin, nothing fancy, but hers. Caleb took one of the bunkhouse rooms, said he didn't need much. They worked side by side, figuring out how to be partners when they'd started as enemies. It wasn't easy. They fought about money, about cattle, about whether to expand or consolidate. But they always fought fair, and they always came back to the same truth. They were better together than apart. One evening, 6 months after the night everything changed, Mara was sitting on the porch of her cabin watching the sunset when Caleb walked up. Got the final paperwork, he said, holding up an envelope. Partnership's official. 50-50, like we agreed. Good. He sat down beside her. You ever regret it? Giving up sole ownership? Every day. He laughed. Honest, at least. You ever regret accepting the partnership? Every day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land turn gold in the dying light. You know what the funny part is? Mara said. My father spent his whole life trying to get this place back. Died still fighting for it. And I came here ready to finish his fight, ready to take it all. But you didn't. Because somewhere along the way I realized he wasn't fighting for ownership. He was fighting for justice, for the truth to matter, for what was stolen to be acknowledged. She looked at Caleb. We did that. Hayes is in prison. The truth came out. The land's back in the right hands, or at least hands that'll treat it right. Your father would be proud. I hope so. She paused. What about your grandfather? You think he'd be proud? Caleb snorted. Hell no, he'd be furious. But he was a bastard, so I'm okay with that. You're not him, you know. I know. Took me a while to figure that out. But I know. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding red and orange across the sky. You remember that first night? Caleb asked. When I gave you that choice? The porch or the bed? Yeah, I remember. I was a bastard that night. You were testing me. I was being cruel. Same thing, in your world. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for that. for making you choose like that. Don't be. It was the best choice I ever made. How do you figure? Because it taught me something, that I didn't have to accept other people's terms, that I could choose my own path, even if it meant freezing on a porch instead of compromising who I was. She smiled. And look where it led, to this, to a partnership, to something that matters, to you almost dying about 6 times. Well, yeah, that too. They laughed. The sound carried across the land, mixing with the evening bird song and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Think we can make this work? Caleb asked. Long term? I don't know. We're both stubborn, both damaged, both used to doing things our own way. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. What is it? Mara stood and looked out at the ranch, the land her father had loved, the land Caleb had fought for, the land they were building together into something new. It's a maybe, she said. It's a chance. It's choosing to try instead of choosing to quit. She looked back at him. And that's more than most people get. Caleb stood beside her. You ever going to tell me what you saw in this place? That first night, when you showed up freezing and desperate? I saw what my father saw, what he lost, what he wanted me to reclaim. And what do you see now? She thought about it, about the months of work and the fights and the compromises, about the crew that had accepted her and the land that had tested her, and the man beside her who'd become something she hadn't expected, an ally, a partner, maybe eventually something more. I see home, she said simply, and that was the truth. Not the whole truth. That was still being written day by day, fence post by fence post, decision by decision, but it was enough truth to build on. Sometimes that's all you get. A choice made in the cold, a chance taken in the dark, a partnership forged in fire, and the stubborn, impossible belief that what's broken can be rebuilt, that what's stolen can be restored, that what's lost can be found again if you're willing to fight for it. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but real. Iron Ridge Ranch stood under the stars that night, no longer dying, no longer stolen, but alive and claimed and defended by people who'd learned that ownership wasn't about papers or deeds or even blood. It was about choice, the choice to stand, the choice to fight, the choice to build instead of destroy, and the choice, made over and over again in 1,000 small moments, to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday if you were willing to do the work. Mara Vance had chosen the porch that freezing night, had chosen dignity over comfort, truth over convenience, justice over revenge. And in choosing, had found something she didn't know she was looking for. Not just a ranch, not just vindication, but a place where she belonged, and people who belonged beside her. That was worth more than any deed could ever prove. That was worth fighting for. And she would, for as long as it took. Because some fights aren't about winning. They're about refusing to quit, about standing up when everyone expects you to fall down, about choosing your own terms, even when the world tries to choose them for you, especially then. The ranch lights burned warm against the night as Mara and Caleb walked back toward the buildings, side by side, partners in a venture that would test them both but never break them, because they'd already been broken, already been tested, and they'd chosen to rebuild anyway. That's what mattered. Not the ending, not the victory, not even the justice, though that helped. What mattered was the choice. And every day, they'd wake up and make it again. Together.